Live in Studio B, this is your day-to-day BYU Sports play-by-play. I am Spencer Linton alongside the always formidable and outstanding Dave McCann. Joining us now on Zoom from CBS College Sports. He is a college football insider, and he is back on the program, is Shehan Jeyarajah. Shehan, welcome back to BYU Sports Nation. And frankly, thank you for creating some news so that we have some things to talk about on this show.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, let's get into it. Last week, as we just heard coming back from break, you said that BYU is still America's most underrated team. Why do you feel like that is the case?
Well, I mean, look back at last season, right? Imagine there was a team that went on the road and beat a college football playoff team that went on to win 11 games to participate in the postseason, and they were ranked behind 3 lost teams. That's what BYU was last year, and I frankly still don't get it. I think that overall, the college football playoff rankings were pretty good, but that was just one that I could not stop looking at even back into last season. And I think heading into this season, they're still very underrated. I mean, this is a team that returns a lot of its offense. I actually put together a list of, out of our top 25 teams, kind of top Heisman contenders. Like, I think that LJ Martin is one of the best running backs in the country that nobody is talking about. Somebody who, when he's on the field, I think is as good as anybody. And then defensively, I mean, this team was a great defense. I don't think people view this as a team that's won 9 games so many of the past couple of years. They view it as the 5-7 team from 2023 when they were transitioning to the Big 12. So I think that this is an underrated program. I think it's an underrated coaching staff, and I expect big things for them in 2025.
Well, Shehan, let's talk about 2025. What are your expectations for this team, and are you buying the notion that BYU could be in the college football playoff at the end?
Yeah, I mean, I would be disappointed if they weren't at least in the conversation at the end of the year. Now, look, I mean, in the Big 12, right, like every single week, there are so many teams that will have an opportunity to be there. And you even look at last year, right? BYU goes on and wins 10 games, but just because of some tiebreaker math, they don't make the Big 12 title game. I would be, again, disappointed if BYU isn't at least in that conversation. Of course, on defense, they're replacing a few key pieces, but I actually think that this is the year that maybe the offense takes even just a little bit of another step forward to potentially being a little bit more balanced and carrying a little bit more of the workload. But again, I kind of mentioned it, like, I don't think that people respect enough how good this team was defensively last year. You look at a lot of past defense stats, they were one of the best in the entire country, up there with teams like Texas and Notre Dame and Ohio State. I expect that to continue heading into next year with another year in Jay Hill's system. And again, look, you kind of just need to work out the math to figure out, are they going to be one of those teams that's truly there at the end of the year? But they should be in the top 15. They should be right on the cusp of a Big 12 title game, and they should be right on the cusp of a college football playoff appearance.
Shehan Jeyarajah, CBS Sports College Football insider and expert, is with us on BYU Sports Nation. I'd like to rewind to late December of last year, Shehan, and discuss the Alamo Bowl and maybe how much vindication a person like you felt when you watched BYU do to Colorado what they did.
Yeah, I mean, again, like, to completely shut down that Colorado passing game, which, by the way, had Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter. They were a fully healthy team that all participated. Like, this is what BYU truly was all year, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, 36-14 is a crazy number for it to end with, and it wasn't a shock to me that they were able to move the ball on offense, but I think it was a surprise to a lot of people who maybe didn't watch BYU all that closely, just how good they were against the pass. And that means in terms of pass rush, that means in terms of manning up wide receivers as well. Like, they were able to take away almost everything that Colorado wanted to do. It was about as bad as a finish to Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter's college football careers as you could have ever had. And again, like, obviously the defense is replacing some pieces, but like, this is largely the unit that's going to be coming back in 2025. So again, the great thing about having Colorado in the league is that everybody watches them, and you look at some of the ratings and numbers, like, this was one of the most watched Alamo Bowls of all time. And I hope that some people are taking that forward into 2025.
So BYU was picked 13th in the Big 12 preseason poll last year, and they finished 13th in the AP Top 25. In your early Big 12 preseason poll for 2025, where do you have the Cougars, and where would you put them in the top 25?
Yeah, so from my perspective, right, like I think that you almost have to approach the Big 12 in tiers a little bit just because so many teams are so close. But they would certainly be part of my top tier. I would have them in the top three potentially. I went on a radio interview last week and I did pick them, at least right now, to win the Big 12. But Arizona State's going to be there. Texas Tech is going to be there. Baylor's going to be there. There's some other teams that could get into that conversation. But they absolutely are part of that top group. Again, look, we have another month before we have to cast our ballot for preseason Big 12 poll, but BYU will be one of my contenders to be my number one team in the conference. In terms of the preseason top 25, I mean, again, I think that they should be in that 10 to 15 range. There are some legitimate questions about the team, of course. Can they continue to be as consistent on offense? They had great close game luck last year for the most part. Will they be able to continue that in 2025? But I still think that even a very modest outlook has them as maybe the 12th to 15th best team in the country. So that's where I would have them in my preseason rankings.
Outstanding insight from CBS Sports College Football insider Shehan Jeyarajah. We continue specifically with BYU's quarterback. How do you assess Jake Rzoff? Because last year, Pro Football Focus had him ranked dead last of the 16 Big 12 quarterbacks going into the season. This year, we're starting to see him pop up around 6 in the middle of the pack. Do you feel like he's underrated? What are you seeing in your assessment of Jake Rzoff?
Well, he's a really interesting quarterback to try to evaluate because, look, like I don't think that he's shown NFL skills per se, right? Like he is not somebody who is a traditional pocket passer who's going out there and averaging 10 yards per attempt or whatever. But I think that what gets kind of lost in the process, well, actually two things that get lost in the process. One, I think his playmaking ability is a little underrated. I mean, you look at some of these close games in 2024, it was Jake Rzoff making the right play in the right moment. The other thing, too, is I think that he's undervalued as a runner, and not just in terms of his ability to actually get rushing yards, but his ability to extend plays and create opportunities for his teammates. And by the way, for most of the season, he had to do this without much of a consistent running game because of the injuries at running back last year. I think that there's a lot of reason to believe that, one, with LJ Martin back and healthy and potentially a really good running game, he has the ability to really grow in that zone read and that play action game. And the other thing, too, is like you look at the jump that he made from 2023 to 2024. I mean, he was a kind of a mediocre quarterback when he got to play in 2023. And I got a great quote from Kalani Sitake last year when I talked to him for a story where he was basically like, what did you think was going to happen? I feel like people had this idea that we were just going to sit back there and not get any better. Well, Jake Rzoff proved that he can continue to get better, and working with this coaching staff, continuing to grow in his skills, and also with a great receiving core coming back, I think that around 5 to 6 in the Big 12 is about right. But again, he has upside there that he has the ability to tap into.
When you think about the number one defense in the league returning, and probably the best special teams unit with Will Farron at kicker, and you mentioned LJ Martin healthy and everybody else, he doesn't have to be Superman for BYU to accomplish everything you think they can.
No, absolutely. And that's such a big part of it, right? Is like if he's allowed to just be a good piece of a great unit, I just think that the upside is so immense. You saw those moments last year, especially in the first half of the year, whenever the running game was hurt, where he was just having to go out there and throw some stuff up and there were mistakes made. Well, now I think that this unit as a whole has a chance to be a lot more cohesive, a lot better, a lot further along. I mean, the return of Chase Roberts, obviously, I think is a huge deal for this unit. I expect some growth from the young receivers and tight ends. Like I think that he just has to make those plays in the big moments. And if we know one thing from his 2024 campaign, that's what he does best.
Shehan Jeyarajah is with us on BYU Sports Nation. Let's look at BYU's schedule in 2025, because you mentioned some teams that you expect to be in your top tier where, well, at least a couple of those are not on BYU's schedule. There's no Arizona State, there's no Baylor, no Kansas State, no Kansas that BYU plays, at least not in the regular season. It's been slated as an easier Power 4 schedule. How do you see it, Shehan?
Yeah, I think it's pretty manageable. And here's the reality, right? I mean, I think that we can look at the past couple of years. Getting a good draw is critical to being able to make it to the conference championship game. I mean, last year, BYU had to play so many of the best teams in the Big 12. And ultimately, of course, they go and lose against Kansas and against Arizona State in some really, really close games. So I think to have a relatively favorable schedule, like that's a huge deal when you start to project teams as contenders. I mean, some of those teams that I mentioned, right? Baylor, Texas Tech, BYU, part of the reason for it is because they do have more manageable schedules and they avoid each other. Now, I will say, as somebody who's been around the Big 12 for over a decade at this point, there is something a little sad about the idea that every team doesn't play everybody, that everybody doesn't just have a hard schedule. But when you do have these years that you have a more manageable path, like you got to take advantage of them. And I think that BYU might have one of them.
What do you think is the biggest question mark for BYU as a whole heading into 2025?
Well, I think that defensively, of course, I mean, you look at the loss of somebody like Tyler Batty. Like, I think that they're going to have to develop some new guys on the defensive side of the ball. They don't rank near the bottom of the country in returning production on defense, but they're middle of the pack just because of some of the key players that they've lost. So I need to see Jack Kelly take another step forward. I need to see some more growth in that secondary, of course, that was so good in 2024. And then the other thing, too, I think, is just health overall. I mean, again, you look at some of the games that BYU lost across the season, it was because while they had good depth, they're still developing it, right? I mean, that's the toughest thing about going from being a nominal group of 5 team to being a power conference team, is that you have multiple years of building up power conference rosters. So those are steps that I expect them to take in 2025. But again, replicating some of the success they had on defense and also in close games, like it's a tall task. And there have been teams in the past that certainly haven't been able to do it.
Let's end with this question, which frankly we could spend all week discussing, but if you could summarize it somehow, when I ask, are you in favor of the proposed new format for the college football playoff going to 16 teams? And of course, the 4 auto bids for the SEC and the Big 10, 2 for the Big 12, 2 for the ACC, 3 at-larges, and 1 group of 5. How do you perceive that whole idea in the world of college football?
Well, let me start with this. I think the idea of having multiple auto bids to a postseason is frankly a joke. Like the idea of finishing 4th place in the SEC and maybe not even being a top 25 team in the country, but being guaranteed a spot because of your conference affiliation, it's anti-competitive to me. There's really no other type of sports where you're guaranteed a spot just for the right of finishing 4th place in your own conference. That just doesn't exist. If you're as good a conference as you believe that you are, and by the way, I think the SEC and Big 10 are that good, play your way in. Don't just guarantee yourself a spot. And again, especially with 16 teams, if you're not putting 4 in with all of the resources you have available to you as one of these Big 2 leagues, that's fully on you. There's no other way to put it. When you talk about 16, look, I loved 12. I thought that 12 was a great number. I thought that the way that it was set up made a lot of sense. I also do think, though, that the one piece about 16 that might make a lot of sense and might be kind of good is everybody in the top 8 will get an on-campus playoff game. And when you look last year, that was one of the coolest new developments that we've seen in college football, is the idea of the on-campus college football playoff games. I know why the teams that are in the top 4 would clamor for those opportunities. So look, 16 is a little bit of a bigger number than I think is ideal for competition. But when you talk about the idea of having 8 on-campus playoff games, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, frankly, it didn't go well for the teams that had a bye, and all of the home teams that had that home playoff game went gangbusters. So very, very interesting commentary there. We appreciate the time as always, and know that you're busy. Just so that we know, how do BYU fans find more of your work and insight, Shehan?
Yeah, you can follow me on every social media platform at Shehan Jeyarajah, and you can find all my work at cbssports.com.
You got it. Shehan Jeyarajah on BYU Sports Nation, and we appreciate the time, brother. Be well.
Thank you so much for having me.